In today's show, we're talking about SharePoint item level security via Power Apps, or I guess via Power Automate. I don't know. What we're going to do is we're going to take our banking app we've been working on and we're going to break down all the flows underneath the covers that are locking down all the items as we create them so you can understand better how to make sure your SharePoint data is really secure when it's the backend for your Power Apps. But first, here's our intro. Hi, my name is Shane Young with PowerApps 911. Those guys. And today, we're going to talk about security, right? And the idea here is that we've built this Power App. We've got a lot of complex data, but it's a lot of secure data. It's banking data. It's personal security questions. And so what we want to do is we want to make that data as secure as possible, but we're using SharePoint as our data source. And we know when you use SharePoint as your data source, that your users have to have access to the backend data, right? We can do our little stuff to hide it and try to make it harder for them to find. But at the end of the day, this data was so secure, I didn't want to just hide it and do a little security by obscurity. I also want to go that next step and have a series of flows that will change the permissions of each item. You'll also kind of see that by doing this, we're going to lock people out of a lot of the UI, which is another thing that we haven't talked about, but it's kind of one of those added benefits of all this. So with all that said, let's switch over to my desktop and let's just kind of take a look at this. All right, so over here on the desktop, we've got the Young Family Vault that we'd previously built. And we know, this is I guess part 3 technically, but we know that it's looking at this, that the users, in this case, like if we go to manage users, so Ferguson the cat just has access to his data. And he has to set up all the security questions to get access, and that's how he's been getting in. So what I want to talk a little bit about is what is that really meaning for Ferguson? So let's switch over to Ferguson's browser real quick. And actually, before we switch over to Ferguson's browser, let's just punt Ferguson out of the app. So we're going to use the delete button here. And so do you want to delete them? You can see I just did a little pop-up. And basically when I delete them, what we're going to do is I'm going to remove them from the Office 360 group we added them to previously and remove some of their SharePoint data so I don't have a bunch of old data after the fact. So pretty straightforward. So we're going to remove Ferguson so we can kind of start from no Ferguson. And don't worry, we're not setting up his security questions again. So now that Ferguson's out of all the, lost all of his access there, what I want to go over here and do is look at our SharePoint side. So Ferguson doesn't know where this SharePoint site is, right? Like if he goes to SharePoint here, you're going to see that he does not see the SharePoint data, right? He doesn't see one called the Young Family Vault or something like that. But if somehow Ferguson got the URL to that, right? Like some bad person said, here, Ferguson, here's the secret URL you're not supposed to know about. So Ferguson gets the URL. Ferguson doesn't have access, right? Completely locked out. And this is what we want, right? We want this interface because if we look at it logged in as me, we go to SharePoint, you're going to see that the only people who have access to this site are Nicola and I. But remember, SharePoint handles item level permissions pretty well. So if we give Ferguson access to a specific item in a SharePoint list 4 letters down, it doesn't matter that he doesn't have access to this root site. So Ferguson, none of the users of my app need access to any of this information. Okay. So then now we're going to go over here. We're still in as me. We're going to add Ferguson. So I'm going to search for cat. There's Ferguson. And we're going to press add user. And we've talked about this before, so we're not going to talk about the SharePoint creating the content. Remember that was in part 1 or 2. I don't remember, one of those two. I think it was in part 1. But what we're going to look at this time is the flows that we're going to run. So here we've got 2 flows. We're going to notify him as access and then set the SharePoint permissions. Right? That's what this is really about. So what are those 2 flows? Let's go over here and look at the easiest one first, and that is the bank app email notify. So we press edit here. This flow is triggered by PowerApps, right? Nothing to set up there. And all this flow does, it says, all right, PowerApps triggers me. I'm going to wait 5 minutes. Okay, so we're using a delay action to wait 5 minutes because those emails, or when we add the user to that group, it takes about 5 minutes for everything to process on the back end. So we are saying, hey, let's delay 5 minutes. And then after 5 minutes, we're asking PowerApps, who should we notify? And then we're sending them a link and say, hey, congrats, you now have access to the banking app. So nothing complicated there, but I want to make sure you guys knew this was here and why I did it this way. And it was basically because the backend, adding it to the Office 365 group, in my experience, it's taken about 5 minutes. And PowerApps can't wait 5 minutes to send an email, but Flow can. So PowerApps just says, hey, Flow, send this person an email. Flow says, cool, I'll do that in 5 minutes. Easy enough. Okay, that was the first one. Not about security, but I wanted you to see that one. The one that is about security is, what flow did we run over here? Oh, let's go over here. So the flow that we're going to run here is set SharePoint permissions for bank app. Right, because there's actually a few here. You can see that I've got 4 flows total for this app. But so set SharePoint permissions for bank app. This one is also not very complicated. PowerApps is your trigger, nothing to set up there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the SharePoint action grant access to an item or folder, right? We've done a video on that before, so I'll put a link up there. But with that link, I want to explain how I'm using it here. So site address, young family. What list or library? Security info. So we're telling it where the data lives. Makes sense. Then it's like, hey, what record do you want to grant access to? And so I want to grant access to a specific folder or ID, or sorry, I want to grant access to the specific item I just created. So in PowerApps, I am passing the ID, right? This first one here is the ID of the item that we created in security info. So once again, if we go over here and look at security info, so site contents, we go to security info, and we were to say, show me you can see, right? Permissions for this list, Ferguson doesn't have any, no access. So what we did is when we create the item for Ferguson, we're passing the ID of that item over to our flow. So right here, and then we're passing Ferguson's email address, right? So Ferguson, or I think it's cat@powerapps911.com. So we're passing who we want that, and we're giving Ferguson edit access to that record. Because Ferguson, so we create the record, but Ferguson needs to go fill in all of his own security questions, right? This is the list with, all the questions about what is your PIN, question 1, question 2. So unfortunately, Ferguson not only needs item level permissions to this, but Ferguson's going to need edit access to the specific item. So Ferguson still can't really find this security list on his own, but if he did, he would only have access to the one, right? So if we go back over here, let's just add Ferguson real quick. My little Pac-Man loading screen. This is just a GIF that I put there. So now if we go over here, so this is what I see. If we refresh, we're going to see Ferguson's. There we go, added by me. You can see it's not configured at all, but it added that blank record. If someone was devious and gave Ferguson this URL, because Ferguson is never going to guess the name of this list, I don't believe, but if they did, give it to him, what's going to happen? Ferguson puts this URL in. Ferguson can get to this list, but Ferguson can't, there's no edit button up here. If Ferguson, tries to, there's no edit. Sorry, I took away the edit. I took away the ability to edit in grid view. And I also used a little bit of our customize in PowerApps. So if I click on this record, Ferguson, haha, I can just go circumvent your app. What happens? Ferguson also gets an error message here because Ferguson has no rights to this list. Ferguson doesn't have access to the Power App that supports this list. So he just gets this weird error message, right? Because we don't want Ferguson doing this. So I'm okay that he's getting a weird, go away. The only way that Ferguson can get to this data and edit it right now is via my Power App, which is what I was after. Okay. But so that's given Ferguson the item level security for this one. So then if we look at our flow a little further, so that was for that one. So then we're going to do the same thing for there is a summary list. And so in this particular list, this is where we're rolling up. Like basically this is one where I store what is Ferguson's current balance, right? So this is a list over here. Oh, right here. This is the balance summary. So in this particular one, I see all 3 records. Cat here only is going to see the 1. So we're locking this record down. But in this case, because of my data, Ferguson only even needs read access. So Ferguson can't even edit this data, even if he does like Kung Fu Ninja stuff, right? It is locked down. It is view only data because he literally doesn't have access. And then finally, there's another list for the balance details. This is like all the transaction history, same type of thing. Now remember, I didn't ask in Power Apps once for each one of these. If we look at my dynamic content real quick, we will see that I'm just using, for For the ID portion anyway, right? I'm sorry, for the ID, that is different for each one. So each one of these records got created are all different. But then the email recipient is just one email recipient. So that you should be asking PowerApps for 4 things. If we look over my Power App, oh, I left that screen. Let's go back over there real quick. Manage users. So when we add, we're sending 4 things, right? The ID of the security record, the user's email, right? So this is how we're able to give it to Ferguson. And then the balance summary ID and the balance details ID. So those are the 4 pieces of information you need to pass to Flow so Flow can lock all that information down, right? So that's the big part of it. And just as a reminder, like over here, a lot of people are really fascinated by, so Ferguson got here, right? Somebody gave him this URL. Ferguson could never get here by himself, but someone gave it to him. Ferguson's trying to help him get in trouble. If Ferguson goes up here and says like site contents, 403 forbidden, right? Ferguson goes up here and like, oh, well, just show me the SharePoint start page. Oh, that's not that start page you wanted. He goes over here, I'll click on Young Family. Sorry, you don't have access again. You know, Ferguson is truly locked out of this. Now, at least one of you is thinking, well, Shane, what if you give him access to this list? Somebody sends him this URL. Fair question. We'll go over here real quick, paste it in. Same thing. He can read this data. SharePoint even knows he can't edit it. So I didn't even have to mess with locking this one down further, right? It's just SharePoint's like, oh, Ferguson can read this. That's it. So that is how we are setting the initial data up, right? Setting all these things down. But because we never gave Ferguson that top level access, which you normally think about giving them, he just can't do anything, okay? So then the next flow is really pretty easy. Back over here. So in the next flow, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to lock down all the future records as well, right? So this is kind of that initialization, got it all set up. And so then now if I go in here and I say, hey, I want to manage balance and I want to give Ferguson some money, right? So I'm going to give him $12. Comment is, hi, cat. And then finally the pin, I think is 1, 2, 3, 4. It is. Good job, me. So when we go to press post here, actually post just shows a pop-up. So this is just saying, hey, do you want to do all this? We talked about this in the first video as well. But the confirm button, what's it going to do? It's going to create the new balance details record, right? So this is the transaction, a $12 deposit. It's going to then grab the ID of that record and put it in this variable. It's going to update his balance summary. So his balance was 0. We're adding $12 to it, right? We just deposited $12. So we're just updating that. And then we just need this last flow to bank app secure transaction data. We're going to pass it the ID of the record we just created. And then once again, Ferguson's account. That flow, go away. That flow is right here. And this one is even simpler because it's the same thing. Nothing in PowerApps. And all we're doing is saying, hey, that record we just created, that $12 transaction that we're creating, lock it down as well. Because if we didn't do this step, then Ferguson wouldn't have access to the details, right? When Ferguson goes over to, right here. So, here, we'll just do this. So if we want Ferguson to be able to see, this $12 record, you've got to add it to SharePoint. He has no access, and then give him that read access so he can read this data later on. So make sure when you're doing this item level permission, right, there's a lot to juggle here because you've got to not only set it up right, but then every time you add an item, you need to set that permission. Or if you want to change it, right, you've got to maintain it. This is the scary part about doing item level permissions is you have to do all the work. You have to think about every ramification, every button press. Do I need to change permissions, remove permissions, add permissions? Because you're basically saying, SharePoint, I'm going to do all the work myself. You just have to be a little brave and take that on. Okay? Now, the other thing that I did in this app is another concept we had explored a few weeks ago, but I just want to show you how I was actually using it in my app. So if you remember, one of the things that I wanted to do in a previous video was I wanted it so that when you came here to site contents, if you had access here, you wouldn't see these lists, right? Remember, that was one of my goals. And so with that being one of my goals, we came up with the flow that would do that, right? So my flows, go away. We went in here and said this one. And so we were using that whole send an HTTP request, right? So another video if you haven't seen that one, but all we're doing here is we're saying, hey, take the list name security info, do all this header stuff, and then set the list to hidden is true, and then no crawl to true. So that way it's not in the index and it doesn't even show up in the list. So it's overkill for this app because they don't have a way to even see site contents, but it was something I felt like I should have included because I figured out how to do it for this app initially anyway. So what I interestingly did here though, was I was thinking about like, hey, if I'm always hiding those, if I have to go manually do things or work on it, it's kind of a pain for me. So I made this admin only screen that there's no way to get to other than when you're in the editor, right? There's no button in my app that gets you here. But basically if you press this button right here, it runs that flow and it sets everything hidden to true. If you press this one, it hits and sets everything to false. So right now they're all visible, right? Yep, right there, there's 3R. So if I just go into my app and I'm just like, all right, hide the list, hold down my Alt key, press hide list, it will run the flow. We go back over here and refresh, and then those 3 are hidden. So this was an idea I had, right? Because a lot of times we as admins start to build functionality like hiding lists or other types of, things, but sometimes we want to turn that off when we're working, right? It makes my life a lot easier if I can just go to site contents and demo all those for you guys. So in my app, I just put a simple little flow and these 2 buttons. But like I said, this screen, you can't even get to from the actual app when you're running it. You have to be in Studio because my thought is if you're in Studio, you have permissions to manage the security. So I made these buttons for convenience for me. I'm a selfish guy. I like to make my life easier. And these 2 buttons do exactly that. So that's the 4 flows that I have in here. Setting up, right? So these 4. The purple 4. So setting this up though, this is just, going that next mile because a lot of us are using SharePoint and a lot of us have a lot of data that we just count on our users not finding. And sometimes that's okay, right? But sometimes we're building, HR applications or a bank app. Can you imagine if like your bank decided to build a Power App and manage it in SharePoint? Hopefully they don't. But if they did, these are the type of thoughts they would have. So I was wanting you guys to kind of see this model of item level security inside your app. I think that's everything for today. So the next video, we're going to talk about one of those experimental features, which is formula level error management. And we're going to talk about how that does some really cool stuff, like letting you patch blank dates or other blank fields in SharePoint. Yay. But it has a dark side as well. So I want to make sure that we cover the dark side. Because I feel like everyone that's made content about it before only shows you the pluses, but not the ways it's going to break some of your existing work. So we're going to talk about both sides of that equation next week. Also, a quick shout out to Austin. I hear you're having a little bit of a rough recovery from, reaching too high, shall we say. So Alyssa asked me to say hello to you. So hi, Austin. I hope you feel better. Chewy does too. But he's went to take the kids to school, so he's not here right now. So sorry. Anyway, if you guys have any questions, comments, ideas for additional add-ons to this series, leave them below. I am very excited to continue down this idea of building a really secure, fully functional app inside of PowerApps with you. And I'm doing a lot of training lately. Training is everyone's excited. My class this week is sold out. So go check out training.poweraapps911.com. Sign up for a training class. Hang out with this guy for a bunch of days. It'll be awesome. Okay, and with that, I'm going to say thanks and have a great day. Before you go, be sure to click on the subscribe button over here so that way you'll be notified when new videos come out. If you need any help or you want to work together, whether your problem is big or small, check us out at PowerApps 911. We do it all. I rhymed. Or if you're looking for more formal training offerings, we have those linked up here somewhere. So check them out. Thanks and have a great day.